Hello and welcome to our next lesson. Now in this video, we're going to start in on a series of videos where we're going to examine the components that help us to lay out our pages or our templates with Bootstrap. So we're going to be looking in detail at some of the grid components, essentially the rows and columns that we'll be using, and we'll talk about some different sizes. So what you'll want to do is get the cheat sheet that's available in the lecture previous to this, and you can use that as a reference going forward. But essentially, you might want to take some other notes on that as well on your own that will allow you to remember columns and sizes and things as we go. So what we're going to do here is actually start building new pages each time, and we'll just start where we left off. So what I recommend is grabbing the previous page, which in this case will be index. We won't worry about that carousel page. And we'll start from there. We're going to rename this one, we'll name it rows. So it really doesn't matter, but what we want to do is make sure we make a new copy each time so that we can start where we left off, especially if something were to go wrong. So let's edit this, and we'll see that that will pull up. And what we're going to do is essentially just start building rows on our page. Now, if you're familiar with HTML5, you might remember or know that there are some already positionable content tags that we can use, such as article, things like that, that we could lay out that HTML5 is responding to already. But what we're going to do with Bootstrap is we're actually going to go back a little bit as far as the semantical layout goes. We'll go back to using divs, and we'll just assign classes. Now what happens then is the CSS for Bootstrap itself will go ahead and reposition and use those classes to make sure that everything stays responsive and stays positioned on the page. So we're going to look in detail at those different classes and how we can use them to create rows, columns, some offsets, things like that as we go throughout these next few videos. So the first thing we want to do then is just add a div. And we're simply going to give it the class is equal to row. Now every time we want to create a new row, we're going to do this. So here let's just make a span, and we'll just say this is row 1. And then let's just simply copy that, and let's just make 3 rows so that we have 3 rows to start off with, and we'll have no other data in there or nothing else. But essentially what we're doing is we're going to build from the ground up each time. So we don't want to go too far in so that we get used to using these things as we go. So we could actually just preview it here, and that will pull up our page. But what we'll see is that when we have the Bootstrap in place and we don't correctly set things up, we actually see that there is something wrong here, and that's expected because we don't have this set up correctly. But you can see that they are stacked in rows at least, even though we could spread it out. They're not going over to the right, they're all in rows. So at least that part's working, but we haven't gotten to the point where we started looking at columns. And so what's going to happen in our next lesson is we'll take the time to start putting some columns into these rows, and then we'll look at how we can use those columns, the classes specifically on the columns for different screen width sizes, as well as positioning to make sure our rows span a certain number of columns or are essentially going to be lined up the way that we want our pages to line up. So that wraps up our look at rows, and then we'll come back next time and take a look at putting some columns into these rows. Thank you very much. We'll see you then.